There comes a time in every great story when preparation gives way to fulfillment, when the long years of waiting culminate in the moment for which everything has been made ready. For Noah and his family, that time had come. The ark was finished, the door stood open, and God spoke to Noah once more. This is a peaceful retelling of the flood story from the book of Genesis, meant for rest and quiet reflection as you settle into sleep tonight. Come into the ark, you and all your household, God said to Noah, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. The invitation was clear. The time had arrived. The judgment that had been promised was now at hand, and the salvation that had been prepared was now being offered. Noah was to take with him 7 pairs of every clean animal, male and female, and 2 of every animal that was not clean, male and female. Of the birds also, 7 pairs, male and female, to keep their kind alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days God would send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that he had made would be destroyed from the face of the earth. 7 days, 1 week, a final period of grace before the waters came. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. The account repeats this simple statement, this testimony to faithful obedience. Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on the earth. 6 centuries of life, and now this moment that would define not only his life but the future of all humanity. The animals came. This is one of the most remarkable parts of the account, told with quiet simplicity. The animals came to Noah 2 by 2, male and female, just as God had commanded. They came of their own accord, drawn by some instinct placed within them by their Creator. They came and entered the ark, and Noah received them. Imagine the procession, the great beasts and the small, the creatures of the field and the creatures of the forest, the birds of the air arriving in pairs, settling into the spaces that had been prepared for them, the creeping things moving slowly toward the safety of the ark, all of creation represented in miniature, gathering into this vessel of preservation. It must have taken time, the loading of so many animals, the guiding of them to their appointed places, the storing of food sufficient for them all. But there was no rush now. The work was being completed in its proper order, in its proper time. Noah went into the ark with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives because of the waters of the flood. 8 human souls crossing the threshold from the old world into the vessel that would carry them to the new. Shem and his wife, Ham and his wife, Japheth and his wife, and Noah and the woman who had stood beside him through all the long years of building, whose name we do not know, but whose faith we can infer from her presence here. They brought with them the provisions they had stored, the food for themselves and for the animals, the necessities for the long confinement that was coming. Everything had been thought of, everything prepared. The ark was not just a boat, but a floating storehouse, a miniature world unto itself. And then, the account tells us, the Lord shut them in. God himself closed the door. This was not Noah's doing. Noah had built the ark, had gathered the animals, had entered with his family, but it was God who sealed them inside, who made the final separation between those who would be saved and those who would not. There is something both solemn and comforting in that detail. Solemn, because it meant the door was now closed to all others. Comforting, because it meant they were secured by God's own hand, safe in the vessel He had designed. For 7 days, they waited inside the ark. The door was shut, but the rain had not yet begun. 1 week of waiting in the dimness of the ark's interior, listening perhaps for the first sounds of the storm, adjusting to their new reality. This was the final grace period, the last moments of the old world. Outside, life continued. People went about their business, unaware that time had run out, that the door of salvation had closed. Inside, 8 people and all the animals of the earth waited in the stillness before the storm. We can only imagine what that week was like. The sounds of the animals settling into their spaces, the creaking of the massive wooden structure, the muffled sounds of the world outside growing fainter as they adjusted to their enclosed environment. The prayers, perhaps, the quiet conversations, the strange mixture of anticipation and peace. Noah had done everything God commanded. Now there was nothing to do but wait, nothing to do but trust. The work was finished. The obedience was complete. What came next was in God's hands. Then it began. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that very day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The account gives us the precise date, marking this moment with careful specificity. This was not a mythical event in some vague, long-ago time. This was a real event that happened on a specific day in history, recorded with the same precision with which one might mark any significant date. The rain fell. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain fell on the earth. But it was not just rain from above. The fountains of the great deep burst forth. This suggests something more than ordinary rainfall. The waters came from below as well as above. The earth itself was breaking open, releasing vast quantities of water from underground reservoirs. The world was being unmade. The order that had existed since creation was being undone. The separation between the waters above and the waters below, established in the beginning, was being dissolved. The earth was returning, in a sense, to the watery chaos from which it had first been formed. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The massive wooden vessel, which had sat on dry ground for so long, now began to float. After all the years of building, after all the labor and faith, the ark was finally doing what it had been designed to do. Inside, Noah and his family would have felt the movement, the slight rocking as the ark was lifted, the gentle swaying as it began to float freely. After being stationary for so long, they were now moving, borne up by the very waters that were destroying everything around them. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters. This is a quiet image, despite the catastrophe surrounding it. The ark moved about. It was not driven violently, not tossed and battered, but simply moved about, floating safely on the surface of the rising waters. God had designed the ark well. Its dimensions gave it stability. Its construction made it watertight. The pitch that Noah had so carefully applied kept the water out. The vessel that had seemed so strange sitting on dry ground was now perfectly suited to its purpose. The waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The waters rose 15 cubits above the mountains. What had once been high ground, what had seemed safe and permanent, was now submerged. The highest peaks disappeared beneath the waters. The entire landscape of the old world was erased. Everything in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life, all that was on the dry land, died. The account states this plainly, without elaboration. The judgment that God had promised had come. The corruption that had filled the earth had been washed away. The violence that had grieved God's heart had been ended. All living things were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. 8 people, and the animals that God had preserved. From the multitudes that had filled the earth, only these few remained. This is a sobering reality, even told in calm tones. The seriousness of sin, the certainty of judgment, the necessity of responding to God's warnings while there is still time. But we do not dwell on the destruction. The account itself does not linger there. It moves forward to what matters most: the preservation of life, the continuation of God's purposes, the promise of a new beginning. The waters prevailed on the earth 150 days, 5 months, 20 weeks. The ark floated on the vast expanse of water that now covered the world. Day after day, week after week, month after month, the waters remained. Inside the ark, life continued in its enclosed rhythms. The animals needed to be fed. The living spaces needed to be maintained. The daily tasks of survival in this floating refuge had to be attended to. Noah and his family had not been saved in order to be idle. They had been saved to preserve life, to care for the creatures God had entrusted to them, to wait patiently for God's timing to unfold. We are not told much about this time. The account passes over these months with relative silence, but we can imagine the routine that must have developed. The division of labor, the care given to each kind of animal, the conservation of food and water, the trust required to live day after day in the dimness of the ark, not knowing when the waters would recede, when the door would open, when they would see the sun again. This was a time of waiting, of patience, of faith that had to sustain itself not through dramatic signs, but through quiet perseverance. The kind of faith that gets up each morning and does what needs to be done, even when nothing seems to be changing, even when the end is not yet in sight. Then God remembered Noah. This phrase is used throughout Scripture to mark moments when God acts on behalf of his people. It does not mean God had forgotten and then suddenly recalled Noah's existence. Rather, it means God turned his attention toward Noah in a specific way. God moved to act on Noah's behalf. The time of judgment was complete. The time of restoration was beginning. God remembered Noah and all the living things and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were closed, and the rain from heaven was restrained. The sources of the flood were shut off. What had been opened was now closed. What had been released was now restrained. The waters began to recede. Gradually, steadily, the waters began to go down. The process of unmaking was complete. Now the process of remaking could begin. After 150 days, the waters decreased. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the account tells us, the ark came to rest. The exact date is recorded, just as the date when the flood began was recorded. the ark settled onto solid ground again. Noah and his family would have felt it. The gentle bump or scraping as the bottom of the ark touched rock. The gradual stabilization as the vessel settled into place. After months of floating, they were resting on a mountain. But they could not leave yet. The ark had found its resting place, but the world outside was not yet ready for them. The waters continued to decrease, but slowly, in God's time. At the end of another 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made. Light streamed in, perhaps for the first time since the door had been shut. Fresh air, the sounds of the outside world, whatever those sounds might be in this transformed landscape. Noah looked out over the waters that still covered the earth. He sent out a raven, and it went to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. The raven, a bird comfortable with carrion, a bird that could survive in harsh conditions, flew back and forth. It found places to land, perhaps on floating debris, perhaps on the higher peaks that were beginning to emerge. But it did not return to Noah with any message. It simply flew to and fro. Then Noah sent out a dove to see if the waters had receded from the face of the ground. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, and she returned into the ark to him, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. Noah put out his hand and took her, and drew her into the ark with him. The dove, a bird more delicate than the raven, a bird that needed vegetation and dry land, could not yet find a place to rest. The world was not yet ready, and so she returned to the safety of the ark, and Noah received her back, and they continued to wait. He waited 7 more days, and again he sent the dove out from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in her beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the waters had receded from the earth. An olive leaf, a small sign, but a profound one. Somewhere out there, vegetation was growing again. Trees were putting forth leaves. Life was returning to the earth. The waters had receded enough for plants to begin their renewal. Hope, carried in the beak of a dove, in the form of a single green leaf. Noah waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove again, but this time she did not return to him. She had found a place to land, a place to nest, a place to live. The world outside was becoming habitable again. Still, Noah waited. He did not rush out the moment he received these signs. He had waited this long. He could wait a little longer. He had learned patience through all the years of building. He had learned to trust God's timing through the long months in the ark. He would wait for God's clear word before he left the refuge that had saved him. In the 601st year of Noah's life, in the first month, on the first day of the month, the waters had dried up from the earth. Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and indeed the surface of the ground was dry. He could see now. The covering removed, the full light of day entering the ark. Noah looked out over the transformed world. The mountains were visible. The valleys were becoming clear. The earth was drying in the sun and wind. But still, Noah waited. He looked, but he did not leave. Not yet. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was completely dry. More than a year had passed since the flood began. A full year and 10 days. 371 days by some reckonings, from the time the rain started to fall to the time the earth was finally dry enough to leave the ark. A year of waiting. A year of living in the enclosed space of the ark. A year of tending the animals, of maintaining the routines, of trusting that God would fulfill his promise to preserve them and bring them out again into a restored world. Then God spoke to Noah once more. Go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. The command to leave, the permission to emerge, the instruction to release all the animals into this new world. God was setting creation in motion again. The preservation was complete. Now the repopulation could begin. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out of the ark by families. The orderly exit mirrored the orderly entrance. The same care, the same attention to kind and family, the same divine orchestration. They stepped out into the sunlight. After a year of dimness, of lamplight and shadow, they stepped out into the full brightness of day. They breathed fresh air. They felt solid, dry ground beneath their feet. They looked out over a world that was both familiar and utterly transformed. The first thing Noah did was build an altar to the Lord. Not a house for himself, not a field for planting, but an altar. He took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. This was an act of worship, of thanksgiving, of recognition that their salvation was not of their own doing, but was entirely the work of God. The smoke rose from the altar, carrying with it Noah's gratitude, his reverence, his acknowledgement of God's mercy and faithfulness. After all that had happened, after all the judgment and preservation, after the long year of waiting, Noah's first impulse was to worship, and the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. The account uses this anthropomorphic language to convey God's pleasure, his acceptance of Noah's worship. Then the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. This is remarkable. God acknowledged that human nature had not fundamentally changed. The imagination of man's heart was still evil from youth. The flood had not reformed human nature. But God made a promise anyway. He would never again destroy all living creatures as he had done. The judgment had been completed. The cleansing had been accomplished. Now God would work with humanity in a different way. While the earth remains, God said, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. This was a promise of regularity, of predictable seasons, of the reliability of natural cycles. The earth would continue. The rhythms of life would go on. There would be stability and continuity in the natural order, seed time and harvest. The reassurance that agriculture would be possible, that food could be grown, that life could be sustained in the ordinary ways, cold and heat, the passage of seasons, the cycle of weather, winter and summer, the annual rhythm that marks the passing of time, day and night, the most basic alternation, the rotation that makes earthly life possible. These things would not cease. This was God's covenant with the earth itself, a commitment to maintain the conditions necessary for life, a promise of faithfulness that would undergird all human history going forward. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth." This was the same blessing given to Adam in the beginning. Now it was being given again to Noah and his sons, who would be the new beginning for humanity. They would fill the earth. From these 8 people, all the nations of the world would eventually come. God gave them authority over the animals, just as Adam had been given. The fear of humans and the dread of them would be on every beast of the earth, on every bird of the air, on all that moves on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea. They were given into human hands. This was both a privilege and a responsibility. Every moving thing that lives would be food for them, as God had given them the green plants. This was new. Before the flood, there is no mention of humans eating meat. Now, in this renewed world, God was expanding the human diet. The animals were given as food, just as the plants had been. But there was a restriction. You shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Life was sacred. Blood represented life. Even in the taking of animal life for food, this was to be done with reverence, with recognition that life itself was precious and belonged ultimately to God. "Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning," God said. Human life was sacred. It was not to be taken lightly. From every beast and from every man, God would require an accounting for human life. "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man." This was the foundation of justice. Human life was precious because humans were made in the image of God. To kill a human being was not just a crime against that person, but an offense against the image of God that person bore. Therefore, human life must be protected. Justice must be established. The sanctity of human life must be upheld. "And as for you, be fruitful and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it." The command was repeated, emphasized. Life was to continue. Humanity was to spread across the earth. The catastrophic reduction to 8 people was not the end, but a new beginning. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, "And as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth." A covenant. This was not a temporary promise, but an eternal commitment. God was binding himself to Noah and to all his descendants, which meant to all humanity. And not just to humanity, but to every living creature. The covenant included all of creation. "Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." The promise was clear and absolute. Never again. No matter how wicked humanity became, no matter how far they strayed, God would never again destroy the earth with a flood. This was mercy. This was grace. This was God limiting himself, binding himself to show patience with humanity despite their continuing sinfulness. The flood had been necessary, but it would not be repeated. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you, and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth." The rainbow. God placed it in the sky as a visible, physical reminder of his promise. Every time rain fell, every time the conditions were right for a rainbow to appear, there would be this sign, this testimony to God's covenant faithfulness. It shall be, when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. God would remember. Every time God saw the rainbow, he would remember his covenant. Not that God needed reminding in the sense of being forgetful, but this was his chosen sign, his designated memorial, his visible commitment to keep his promise. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. An everlasting covenant, not temporary, not conditional on human behavior, everlasting. God had spoken, and his word would stand. The world began again. Noah planted a vineyard. His sons went out from him and began to multiply and spread across the earth. Life found its rhythms once more. The seasons turned. Crops grew. Children were born. The families of the earth descended from Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The memory of the flood remained. The story was told and retold, passed down through the generations. The rainbow appeared in the sky, again and again, a recurring reminder of God's promise. The earth was populated once more, gradually filled with people and animals, with cities and nations, with all the complexity and beauty and struggle of human civilization. But that is a story for another time. For now, we rest here, in the aftermath of the flood, in the beginning of the new world. We rest with Noah and his family, standing on dry ground, breathing fresh air, looking out over a world that has been judged and cleansed and given a second chance. There is something deeply peaceful about endings that are also beginnings. The flood was an ending, but it was not the end. It was a transition, a cleansing, a making way for something new. The old world passed away. The new world began. And through it all, 8 people and a boat full of animals were preserved by the hand of God. Noah's story is a story of faith and obedience. It is a story of patience and perseverance. It is a story of judgment and mercy, of justice and grace. It is a story of God's faithfulness to his promises, of his commitment to preserve life even in the midst of necessary judgment. But more than anything else, it is a story of covenant. God made a covenant with Noah. God made a covenant with all humanity. God made a covenant with every living creature. And God marked that covenant with a sign that would appear in the sky throughout all generations, a reminder that would never fade, a promise that would never be broken. As you rest tonight, think of the rainbow. Think of God's faithfulness. Think of the fact that morning comes after the storm, that light follows darkness, that new beginnings are possible even after the most complete endings. Noah walked off the ark into a world that was both empty and full of possibility, empty of the corruption that had filled the old world, full of potential for what the new world could become. He stood on that mountainside and built an altar and gave thanks, recognizing that he had been saved not by his own merit, but by God's grace, the grace that found him in a corrupt generation, the grace that spoke to him when no one else was listening, the grace that gave him precise instructions for building a vessel of salvation, the grace that shut him in when the judgment came, the grace that remembered him when the waters prevailed, the grace that brought him out into the new world, the grace that made a covenant that would last forever. Let your mind settle on this covenant, this promise that God made to all of creation. Never again would the waters become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow stands as a testimony to this promise. Every time you see it, you are seeing God's commitment to preserve the earth, to maintain its seasons, to allow life to continue. This is the God who saved Noah. This is the God who remembers his covenants. This is the God who makes promises and keeps them. This is the God who brings his people through the waters of judgment into new life on the other side. The ark was a type, a foreshadowing of salvation to come. Just as Noah and his family were saved through water, so believers are saved through baptism, not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a good conscience toward God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The pattern was established here in Noah's story. Judgment comes, but God provides a way of salvation for those who trust him. The floodwaters came and went. The old world passed away. The new world began, and God remained faithful throughout it all. Faithful in his warnings, faithful in his instructions, faithful in his preservation, faithful in his covenant. Noah's faith was rewarded. His obedience was vindicated. His patience was ended in blessing. After a year in the ark, after all the waiting and wondering, after all the days of routine and all the nights of trust, he walked out into the sunlight and saw that God had kept every promise. The ground was dry, the sky was clear, the earth was ready to be lived in once more, and overhead, in the clouds, hung the sign of God's everlasting covenant, the rainbow that declared to all creation that the waters would never again destroy all life. Rest in this knowledge tonight. Rest in the certainty that God keeps his promises. Rest in the truth that he is faithful even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. Rest in the assurance that he provides a way of salvation for those who trust him. Noah found rest in obedience. He found peace in following God's instructions. He found safety in the vessel God had designed. And when the flood was over, when the waters had receded, and the earth was dry again, he found that God's promises were true, and his covenant was sure. The story of the flood is not primarily a story of destruction. It is a story of preservation. It is a story of God's commitment to his creation, even when that creation had turned away from him. It is a story of a new beginning made possible by God's grace. 8 people stepped off the ark. 8 people who had been preserved through judgment. 8 people who carried within them the future of the entire human race. 8 people who had seen God's power in judgment and his mercy in salvation. They had lived through an event that would never be repeated. They had been witnesses to the end of the old world and the beginning of the new. They had experienced both the severity and the kindness of God. They had learned that God means what he says, that his warnings are real, and that his salvation is sure. And now they stood in the new world, ready to begin again, ready to be fruitful and multiply, ready to fill the earth once more, ready to live in light of the covenant God had made, in sight of the rainbow that testified to his promise. The days of Noah teach us many things. They teach us that God is patient, but his patience is not infinite. They teach us that obedience is required, even when it seems strange to others. They teach us that faithfulness is rewarded, though not always immediately. They teach us that God provides salvation for those who trust Him. But most of all, they teach us that God is a covenant-keeping God. He makes promises and He keeps them. He establishes covenants and He honors them. He gives His word and He does not break it. The rainbow is still in the sky. The covenant is still in effect. The promise still stands. God said He would never again destroy all flesh with a flood, and He has kept that promise for thousands of years, and He will keep it forever, because it is an everlasting covenant, made not just with Noah, but with all generations after him. As you drift towards sleep, let the story of Noah and the flood settle over you like a blanket of peace. Let the knowledge of God's faithfulness calm your mind. Let the certainty of His covenant promises ease your worries. Let the image of the rainbow remind you that God remembers His commitments, that He is true to His word, that He can be trusted completely. Noah built an ark because God told him to. He entered it because God commanded him. He waited in it because that was what was required. He came out of it when God gave permission. And in all of this, he found that God was faithful. Every step of the way, every day of the long year, every moment of waiting and wondering, God was faithful. The same God who was faithful to Noah is faithful to you. The same God who preserved 8 people through the flood is able to keep you through whatever floods you face. The same God who made a covenant with all creation has made promises to you as well. Promises that are just as certain, just as everlasting. The flood waters rose, and then they fell. The ark floated, and then it rested. The door was shut, and then it was opened. The old world ended, and the new world began. Through it all, God's purposes were accomplished. God's justice was satisfied. God's mercy was demonstrated, and God's faithfulness was proven. This is the pattern we see throughout Scripture. Judgment and mercy, justice and grace, ending and beginning. God is both holy and loving, both just and compassionate. He does not compromise His righteousness, but He provides a way of salvation. He does not overlook sin, but He makes provision for forgiveness. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. In a world that had turned away from God, one man found grace, and that grace was sufficient not only for him, but for his whole family, and for all the animals of the earth, and for the continuation of creation itself. Rest now in the grace that saves. Rest in the covenant that never fails. Rest in the promise that stands forever. Like Noah, you can trust that God knows what He is doing, that His plans are good, that His ways are right, that His timing is perfect. The rain stopped, the waters receded, the ground dried, the door opened, and Noah stepped out into a world that was clean and new, ready for a fresh start, full of possibility. This is what God does. He makes all things new. He brings life out of death, hope out of despair, beginning out of ending. The flood is over. The covenant is established. The rainbow is set in the clouds, and God's promise stands forever. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all flesh. This is His word. This is His commitment. This is His everlasting covenant with you, with all humanity, with all creation. Sleep comes easily when we rest in God's faithfulness, when we trust His promises, when we believe His word. when we remember that He who began a good work is faithful to complete it, when we know that He who preserved Noah through the flood is able to keep us through whatever we face. The story of the flood is complete. The account has been told. Noah and his family are safe on dry ground. The animals are released to multiply on the earth. The altar is built. The sacrifices offered. The covenant is made. The rainbow is placed in the sky. The blessing is pronounced. The new beginning has begun. And we rest here in the peace that follows the storm, in the calm that comes after the flood, in the quiet assurance that God keeps His promises, that His mercies are new every morning, that His faithfulness continues through all generations. May you rest well tonight. May you sleep deeply. May you wake tomorrow with the confidence that the same God who saved Noah, who made a covenant with all creation, who set His rainbow in the clouds as an everlasting sign of His promise, is watching over you with love and care. The waters have receded. The covenant stands. The promise remains. God is faithful. Rest in this peace. Sleep in this assurance. Trust in this promise. The flood has passed. The new world has begun. And God's covenant endures forever. Amen.